with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
This evening on this Tuesday, August 15th, I want to wish all of you who are celebrating this magnificent feast day of the falling asleep of the Virgin Mary to wish you all the very best from our family to yours. My name is Father Nicholas Lowe, and I am the parish priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church. And I'm joined by my lovely wife and co-host, Dr. Roxanne Lowe.
Good evening, everyone. We're happy to be here on this also first day, our first week back to school for so many of us.
That's right. We are getting back to our children's first day of school is tomorrow, so that ought to be quite interesting tomorrow's morning's experience.
It's going to be a rough morning.
But we're so grateful that you're taking the time to join us. And friends, listen, if you are new to the Live with the Louhs broadcast, you should know that this is a show that merges both faith and psychology to really give you some practical steps to apply your faith. You know, we're really, I guess, at our core, we really believe so much into what we call practical Christianity. You know, part of our job as a priest and psychologist is to really give you steps that you can apply your faith. It's not just good enough to simply give a moving sermon or inspiring sermon, but to apply it every single day of your life. And so that's what we hope that this show will do for you. We also want to invite you to take a look at our many social media platforms. We are on Facebook, we're on Twitter, Instagram, all under the headings of the Louhs, and that last name is spelled Louhs. In fact, all of our sermons are archived on our Louhs YouTube page, so definitely take a look at that. And friends, several years ago, we started sending out these daily inspirational messages that really hundreds and hundreds of people have already been receiving every single morning. And basically what we do is we send out these inspirational messages to your email inbox. We write them every day, send them out, and hopefully they inspire and motivate you. And if you're looking for some inspiration in your own walk of faith, go to our website at thelouhs.com. That's LOUHS.com/subscribe. And all you have to do is simply put in your email address, and every single day at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, you'll receive one of our daily words of encouragement. And if you're already receiving them, do us a favor. If you find them beneficial, share them with your friends and family. So you know this by now, but we love the conversation. In fact, we believe that growth in relationships and and just in learning in general happens so much in how we communicate with one another. And so we invite you to join us tonight on this conversation. You can call us during the show at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Our producer, Matushka Trudy, will be overseeing all of the calls that are calling in, so feel free to do so. And if you want to remain anonymous, you're totally able to do so. We love sharing that opportunity with all of our guests calling in. And we also invite you that if you are tuning in, you may be used to us being on Facebook, but now everything that we're sharing with you is being broadcast on our YouTube channel, on Ancient Faith's YouTube channel, and will be on our YouTube channel later on this evening or early tomorrow morning. So definitely keep your comments there if you have comments that you would like to share online, as well as email us a question during the live broadcast of our show by emailing us at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com.
So I want to jump right in because I know that you guys have powerful stories and are doing incredibly powerful work today in the businesses that you run and the numerous businesses that you run as pharmacists. Tell our listeners a little bit about, I guess, Tabula Rasa. We could start with. Let's hear a little bit about the business background and then about your faith backgrounds.
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start. So I'll tell you first a little bit about myself. Both my parents are from Greece, and they married here. So I grew up a Greek American and went to a local church, St. Thomas in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And it really was the nexus of our lives. Everything we did had to do with church. There was no question of whether we'd go to church. We were at the festivals. I went to Greek school. We did Greek dancing. It was great. My only challenge as I got older was that most of the service was in Greek, and the kind of ancient Greek that isn't necessarily what they teach you in Greek school. So when Carol and I were married, we started going to the Presbyterian Church. I became an associate member there. And I really appreciated that the way that I was able to understand and apply a lot of what was biblical there. And I also participated in a Design for Discipleship course, which was a 2-year course, and really was able to understand the notion of prayer without ceasing, and read the Bible in 90 days several times, and still read every day, and really feel like I'm practicing the life of what I'm supposed to be doing from a spirituality perspective. And then we decided to move to spend more time in Florida, and we were able to spend time at St. John the Divine. And it was really like a wonderful combination of understanding the Greek Hellenism aspects of the service and of the church life, but also all the Presbyterian aspect of practical application. So thank you for that. And I became a pharmacist because my grandmother lived with us, and my mother, as the caregiver, always struggled with her medications. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be in the restaurant business, but that obviously wasn't going to work out for me. So when I had the opportunity to work in a local pharmacy and apply to pharmacy school, I thought, well, this is a way to really help others and give back and really get technically oriented towards a healthcare focus.
Okay, thank you, Ursula. And I guess my story is a little bit different. I grew up as a Moravian. Nobody ever heard of that before, but Moravians they were 100 years before Martin Luther. And so it was an old Reformed church in Czechoslovakia. Later moved to Germany when they were kind of persecuted quite a bit, and ended up in Moravia, Germany, and that's why they got called Moravians. And so I did that for a while, and I was wearing my parents' backpack basically, like people do. And when I went to college, I kind of fell away from it for a bit, but I had a very good friend at college that was very, very biblically oriented, and we were hit it off, and it really, really helped me a lot. And I started going to the Presbyterian Church up in Trenton and Princeton because it was there, and I kind of liked it. I liked it. It was less liturgical. The Moravian Church was very liturgical for the first half an hour. And I didn't understand how important the repetitiveness of that was at the time. Now I'm 180 degrees different, but at the time I didn't realize that. And I also liked the breadth of people in the Presbyterian, because some people could hardly assert the divinity of God, and other people were fundamental. So it was really interesting polemics and dialogue. And at some point in time, I became very active in the Presbyterian Church, and I went to seminary at Princeton. And then got an MDiv, and then went back to the PhD in pharmacology and pharmacoeconomics. And so I worked in both. I did pulpit supply back in the day, in the 80s and early 90s. But for the last, 20 years, I've really been focused on the business in pharmacy of trying to help people reduce adverse drug events and premature mortality. And we've had some really good results. We published in the last 4 years about 100 peer-reviewed papers on the topics. So it's a whole thing with genomics and things like that we do with drugs. But enough of that. So I think that I just feel that what we've done in the business world is we have focused on altruism and altruistic behaviors, and that has to do with the culture. And so we're very, very focused on culture and developing a culture prospectively that is purposeful and that encompasses, as kind of an umbrella, if you will, it encompasses the mission, the vision, the strategic goals, the values, and the behaviors. It kind of encompasses everything. And so when we started doing this about 10 or 15 years ago, probably, it really got started with the Ritz-Carlton, because they had this thing. They had they had 20 concepts, if you will, that they taught everybody in the Ritz. And the first one was that when someone asked you where's the bathroom, for example, you don't point, you take them there, and things like that. So then it blossomed, and we had a friend that started a culture business in our town. and we got it in line with him, and we've been using this ever since. And it's and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But
Yeah,
I think,
I actually wanted to, I was
yeah,
going to kind of build on that, Calvin, because I think
yeah,
one of the things I think our listeners are wanting to hear is, for oftentimes when we see people that have really been very successful and obviously, having led, 10 companies at one point, and obviously having the success of having, hundreds and hundreds of employees or team members. I mean, that really requires not only a culture that has to stem from the top. We see that in such companies as Chick-fil-A and others, where they kind of have that a non-negotiable, really core set of values that everyone buys into. And I really would like to, I'd love to kind of describe your purpose in the business that you've created and why it was so important to really kind of have that level, that culture implemented throughout the workforce.
yeah. But there's a number of reasons, but we started with not as much on the value prop itself, but on the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so because, you can see value prop, you can see a sign that says attitude and, teamwork, and they're nouns, but we started with verbs. So what does this really mean in action? How are we going to work with each other, and how are we going to work with our clients? And what are the core behaviors that we want to nourish? And so that's kind of how we've worked on this for a number of years. And the point is that every organization of people has a culture. And the idea is that if you don't get in front of it, it will happen itself, and it'll usually be by the people with the strongest personalities will lead it.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's what oftentimes happens. And
Yeah,
sometimes
so
that's not the culture we want.
yeah, so we call it design culture, that we prospectively design it, and then we have rituals, just like brushing your teeth every day. We have rituals that we go through, so we remember what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to behave. And it's just, and what it leads to is what you could call a high performance company. It's a high performance culture leads to a high performance company. If you have a lackadaisical culture, it's not going to be very performance. And in business, everything needs to be high performance if you're going to exist, if you're going to last. You can't be a slug, So the culture really drives that. So that's why it was so important.
Let's talk about that culture. Let's talk about that culture for a bit, because obviously you're bringing in dimension of one's faith background into a very secular context, and sort of bridging the gap. So I'd love to maybe open up the specific details of what that culture is. What were those verbs that you guys, focus on? Were there 10? Were there 12? And what was the process of bringing that into a secular business?
Well, I think that if, we've been as early as late as today reading your daily inspiration, talking about intrinsic, bringing things from within versus being influenced by the external. I think that's what really has to be brought into business to set the culture. The other example that I love is this notion of that each of us is a book, and people are reading us all the time. So if we don't if our book has to say a certain thing, people will start reading that book and following it. So from internally, we have to set great examples. And many of our culture fundamentals, is what we call them, really are focused on trying to set those examples. For instance, things like assuming positive intent, doing the right thing always. I mean, these are just some of our really grounded fundamentals. And being able to, for example, when we would have events, giving people the opportunity to pray before a meal, or to share information that they'd like to share during a meal. But, while the purpose of a business can be two things. One is that you have an idea that fills a need, or there's just an old process that needs to be updated. The what we do is not as important as how we do it. Right. And often when we deal with competition coming in, people sometimes will say, oh, look at this website. They copied our visuals and they're doing what we do, and this is bad. And I always say, well, don't even think about what they're doing. Let's just focus, because they're not us. So there's a way to deliver your services in a way that can be spiritually grounded and not come off as proselytizing, but really demonstrate, how Jesus would have handled things.
Mm.
And I do want to mention the book that really helped us launch this culture, which is by a gentleman named David Friedman. He's actually a neighbor here, and he wrote a book called Culture by Design. And how he defines culture is the commonly held set of values and principles that show up in the everyday behavior of people. It is not my culture, but it's the way people in the group actually think, believe, and behave. So sometimes you may not even believe those things, but if you're in that culture, you might behave that way and demonstrate that culture. So culture is an active process which hopefully becomes refined and embedded within the team.
Right. You're listening to Live with the Louhs. Tonight we're speaking with some very dear friends, Doctors Calvin and Ursula Knowlton, about what it means to be a leader, a Christian leader in the workplace. We'd love to hear from you. You're more than welcome to call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You're also able to email us during the live broadcast of our show by emailing us at ask, that's A-S-K, at ancientfaith.com. Again, it's ask at ancientfaith.com. Ursula, just kind of going back, and to Calvin as well, to both of you, obviously both of you are very devout in your walk of faith. And I kind of want to go a little bit, off script in some ways and kind of just asking you because, what we're seeing in a lot of studies, especially within churches, is that oftentimes as value or as worth, the net worth of individuals goes up, that oftentimes the desire to be closer to Christ becomes less because people become so focused. They, for a number of reasons, but some speculate it's because they've kind of made it all on their own, and so they almost become a little god in their own mind. And also then the trickle down effect of that is that they're also focused so much on the bottom line, the profit, as opposed to that altruistic, values that you were mentioning earlier, Calvin. What has kept you guys grounded? Because, you obviously have had a lot of success in your work, in your life. You've obviously done a lot of that. Didn't come easy. That required a great deal of hard work and your efforts in it. But what has kept you grounded as you've reached all those successes to always remember this all came from Christ and keeping that so deeply entrenched in your own home, but as well as in your businesses?
Well, I think it's what you keep in your heart every day. And that has to show forth. And you are absolutely right. And we have seen it. We've just seen it recently, for example, how some people, don't have that type of a culture. And their culture is to try and make as much money as they can and the heck with anything else, type of stuff. And that's not us. I mean, that's not what we do. And if we ever started doing that in our practice, somebody would say to us, that's not us. That's not the culture.
Why is that? Why is that?
Well, because it's self, it repairs itself in a way. Like if you have a culture that doesn't allow foul language or dirty jokes or something like that, and somebody does that or says that, somebody else is going to say to them, hey, we don't do that around here. That's not us. And so it's self-healing in a way. Now, there's exceptions, of course, but a lot of it has to do with the type of people you put on the bus. That you have to make sure ahead of time that when you select the team members, that they are a good fit with your culture, because people have had their values honed for many years, and this may be antithetical to their values. And so the worst thing we can do is bring on somebody that's certainly not going to match us or not going to have the cultural attributes that we're looking for and the altruistic attributes we're looking for. So it's got to be a good fit. And that also affects, as we mentioned before, the performance. A high performance culture is not something that just happens, but when you get a team together that's all pushing the blocking sled the same way, if you will, in football, it's going to go in the direction that your vision is and where you want it to go. But you're right, and I don't know how people can cure that problem they have, that that the money's the biggest thing for I feel bad for them, to be honest with you, because I think that there's much more to life than what we see on this earth. and things that happen to us on this earth. And I think that, we have to have a higher calling.
Well, making money is not a purpose. I mean, it's certainly not a purpose. And I think that keep staying humble is really important in trying to, and to have the team realize that these good things that happened or even the bad things that happened are not due to one individual, and keeping that team approach and understanding that, God has brought us these things and given us these opportunities. I think that's important in trying to stay grounded, to answer your specific question on that. But when you do have people come in, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I guess I just want to build on that. How do you, like individually, or I know you mentioned, beautifully that earlier that that you were reading our daily inspirational messages, but I know, and how do you though, intentionally every day just stay grounded in your faith? Because I'm sure that there's just, just because we're Christians and we're yearning to live out our faith does not mean that the temptations or the struggles don't come. How do you guys stay grounded? Because you're being faced with so much individually. Can you kind of maybe share like a practice that you do every day that just kind of helps you to create the culture that has that trickles out into your workplace?
Yeah, and let me start, and then Ursula can pick up. In order to ritualize this, you need to have a system in place, and so, for example, we have a chief culture officer, and it happens to be a retired Presbyterian minister in town, and then we have another culture officer in Florida who happens to be another minister down in Amelia Island, and then at each site we had a deputy culture officer, if you will. So we always had people there that were espousing the culture, so to speak, the parameters, the attributes, and we did a lot of things to try and propagate that. So they also, we allowed them to also use the ministers if they wanted to for problems they had in their family, for example, and then we would pay for, if they need a psychology consult, there's Christian psychologists in our area. We would refer them and pay for it, for a certain period of time. Everyone in the company is encouraged to take a mission day during the year, and if they don't, we wonder why they don't. To perform public service, and most of them do. If they need extra time off for sick parents or children, we accommodate that without any penalty. So we do partial school loans forgiveness to help them. We have a very active, in our last three companies, we have a very active grad program, which is GRAD, Grants for Relevant Advanced Degrees. So we would pay for an advanced degree if it was relevant, like a MBA or whatever it would be, and then. They would, after they got it, they would work with us. For every year they worked with us, we'd forgive. It used to be $10,000, now it's $15,000 a year. So if they worked with us a few years, they could forgive all that. So, there was a lot of things that we tried to do to make the team appreciate, that this is a good culture and it's altruism. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, to answer Father Nick's question specifically about what do we do daily, I think one of the things that is tough about work is that you're always so task oriented when you're in the office. You're in meetings, you're answering phone calls, you're doing emails, and you don't really have a chance to pull the lens back on what's really happening at work. And I think just getting some time alone and some time to reflect and some time to pray gives you the chance to think, why don't we do this for our team? Why don't we? We had an individual who just started working with us, and his father passed, or his father was put on hospice, and he was like, what do I do? I mean, I just started this job, my father's dying, and we just said, just go home, just come back when you can. And it wasn't about how many hours of PTO he had or whether he was going to not get paid. It was just go home and take care of what you need to take care of. And another... We've had a lot of examples like that we've done. It's just the right thing to do. It's one of our fundamentals is we have 32 fundamentals, we call them. And one of them is always remember that we're a family.
that our relationships go
Right.
deeper than simply being teammates at work. We genuinely care for each other. And so whether it's a kind word or a smile in the morning or a helping hand when show compassion. So that's more the verb. So the fundamental always has a few things that are a verb, what to do about it. So I think that we've tried to embed our Christian values in without being, as Ursula said, without being proselytizing, so people could tell we're Christians by our love.
I mean, it's
Oh, that's
just
a song.
beautiful. I was thinking the same, but it's quite beautiful that to be able to do all of those things and interact with your employees in that way, you also have to be assuming positive intent. You also have to be doing the next right thing in relationship. And so really what I see is your fortitude in being able to live those values has really sort of helped, probably embed that culture in a pretty profound way because people trust you. And I'm sort of wondering, what do you do when, somebody's sort of embedded in that culture and they aren't necessarily, on board with that culture, or don't necessarily align with the values that you've set forth for altruism and that we're a family and we want to assume positive intent. Oftentimes, there's consultants who come into companies all the time and there's a lot of conflict and negativity, and people who are not team players, who don't look for the collective good, but are kind of out for themselves. And so, you've built large companies. I mean, this is not 20 people that work in your organization. How did you do that?
One of the reasons why we put the fundamentals together is because as we saw the company's trajectory, we thought, well, we need to have a construct so people know how to behave, even when we aren't able to really recite everybody's name when we see them. And we tried to do that as much as possible, but it really was helpful to have the construct. And I think from what you're saying, it reminds me of being at a culture event of different companies that all subscribe to the same culture program. And the person next to me said, "Oh, I'm really having a tough time. I had to let go of our number one salesperson because he was just not our culture, or she was just not our culture." And I said, well, why are you reacting this way? And he said, because we couldn't keep him on. He or she was just it's not helpful to the team. And even though he was such a high performer, we had to let him go. And I think that is really demonstrating how important it is that one person who's just doing a great job but makes everybody feel terrible and is creating all these problems, we need to figure out another way to make the team a high performance group, not just have one high performance leader. And often what we do is, we would have culture officers. So culture officers would be able to see some of these dynamics and call people out. And a lot of times, the fundamentals would allow people to call each other out on different things based on the fundamentals. Like practice blameless problem solving is one. Like people shouldn't get defensive when there are problems. We're trying to figher them out, and we're here together as a family.
I think,
I love that. Blameless
I think also,
problem
Roxanne,
solving.
I'd also like to say that what we found, the toughest person is somebody who's an individual contributor. So they like to work by themselves, not much transparency, things like that, and sometimes it works out, but sometimes it just doesn't. But if you have to talk to the person, then the question is, what do we try and do? We try and find out what is their perspective. We try and clarify the benefits of cultural alignment. This is why it's beneficial for the whole team. We try and find middle ground. Is there a middle ground that we can do? We do have coaching available, although individual contributors don't usually want coaching. So It is what it is. Or what we try and do also is maybe assign them to a different team. Maybe they're just on the wrong team inside. So we're trying to see if that's helpful. But if all that doesn't work, then we just have to have a respectful mutual exit, and that happens. It's not fun, but
yeah,
Well, usually
absolutely.
if it's not working for you and the team, it's not working for them either. So
Right.
it's a welcome
Right.
conversation that can be done very respectfully.
You're listening to Live with the Louhs. We are speaking with Dr. Calvin and Dr. Ursula Knowlton, just extraordinary people who have been so successful in their own careers. But why we have them on tonight is because we're talking about in their leadership capacity, in their workforce, how they've taken their Christian faith and applied it in their leadership positions and their businesses. And so we are so happy that they're joining us tonight. And we encourage and invite you that if you'd like to speak with the Knowltons, please give us a call at 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. And, as we're kind of continuing this conversation, Ursula, I can't help but think, being remembered, reminding myself of my own Greek school and Greek dance school practice growing up, and how much the church was part of who I am, and especially for me because I'm serving the community that helped to really shape my life. I'm serving my home parish. But one of the things I've oftentimes asked guests on our show, especially people that come with what the world defines as success, and obviously you would be that, fit in those categories, but I love your humility, in which everything is always giving glory to God, that God has empowered us with those gifts, that we're simply just sharing them. But when you look back at your life, and Calvin, I'd love to ask this question as well, what were the people, or who were the people that really inspired you specifically in your walk of faith? And what were some of those qualities that they gave you that you've been purposeful or intentional about implementing and sharing with your staff? Ursula, can you start us out with that?
Well, absolutely. It's definitely, as many people have the gift of their parents. So, I worked at our family restaurant for many years, and we have very tough clientele, believe it or not, in Cherryville, New Jersey. And just being able to understand how to handle the clientele, and my dad, I worked a lot. So when I got to work with him, it was really an opportunity to see what he's like at work. And he was just so humble and a real 1-minute manager, all right, don't do that. Hey, let's talk about your weekend kind of person. And everybody loved him, absolutely loved him. He just passed in January. And if anyone's on the call who goes to Ponzo's, they probably knew him. And he worked until way into his early 80s. And he was just a really pleasant and never talked about himself. Always let people talk about themselves and never led on to what he was even working on. And then my mother was kind of the opposite in a way, as some couples really are, in that she always told people what she thought. She really never held back. But that also gave the ability for you to trust her. You knew what she was about. She wasn't holding back. She wasn't just calming you down with kind words. She really meant what she was saying. And I think I have them to thank.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would probably say that my mother was kind of, she was very religious and somewhat spiritual, but very kind. And my dad, I could never tell if he was just putting on a facade or not, to be honest with you, But anyway, but he had his own problems in life. He ended up going to 13 or 14 different schools. He was moved around. His dad died, all sorts of weird stuff. So, but my mom was really, she would say to us that her best thing was love one another. And a couple of our kids have that tattooed on their leg or their arm from her. And then when we would leave the house, ever since I was a little kid, she'd say, put your hands out, put them out. And she'd say, here they are. And here's your manners. Don't forget them. And she'd give us our manners, so to speak, So she was really, but I think the people that really transformed me was a couple pastors. The guy that I had in the Moravian Church back in the day, we had catechism every Saturday for 2 years before we got, membership. And I learned an awful lot there from this gentleman, Norman Procknell. He was really powerful. And then, it was just, I was so lucky. It was so reinforced because I was involved with so many Presbyterian churches for about 20, 25 years. And I was always on the board, the session they call it. And I was always the clerk or in charge of something so I was always involved with that. And people were so supportive, and I think I was trying to be supportive too with people. But I really think that you have to walk the talk. You have to get involved. There's nothing like the fellowship that happens in a congregation, and that keeps that Velcro for you. So I think, and then you probably had the same thing. Then when I got to Princeton, then I met these exceptionally smart professors. The guy that was just amazing to me, his name was Diogenes Allen, moral philosophy teacher. My gosh, I took everything I could from him. He was just, so I think we get helped right along the way. Absolutely. By other folks that come into our sphere, probably mostly providentially, I think, and they really just support you. And I think, to be honest with you, I think that you do the same thing with your congregation. I mean, you folks are just amazing. And I think that, that's why the church is growing so fast.
Yeah, I think it's now that you're saying that and I'm hearing Cal, I'm thinking about all my, aunts and uncles and cousins. I mean, it was such a loving community, but also the church brought that loving community. And even now, I mean, we start new businesses, we need angel investors. My friends from Greek school are still, with me on these things. I mean, it's just amazing how that love is so strong. No matter how long it's been since you've interacted, it's there.
What were your grades in Greek school? Do you have your report cards?
I can't hear you.
Oh. That's right. Very wise. Yeah, I won't answer that question either, by the way. Rex, I know you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I mean, so really in thinking about this, and I'm hoping that my computer doesn't die here. You'll still be able to hear me, but my Zoom might go off here because I'm noticing my battery is low. But, is this process sort of something applicable that you see in churches, for priests who are listening and congregants? In many ways, churches carry their own culture. And in many ways, the Christian values are yes, embedded, in the church. But I'm wondering if there's sort of any applicability in sort of the way that you guys have created this beautiful umbrella and concept and culture amongst everybody. What feedback or advice you'd have for priests and congregants and administration teams in churches?
Well, we if I could go, we have a couple of examples of that. I'm glad you asked that question. But I just got to underscore first that the practical theology that we have at the Greek Orthodox Church is just superb. But so there was a lot of times when there's a change in leadership in a church, things can happen. And in one of the churches I was working in 2018, I was clerk of session, or I was on the session. I was in charge of strategy, and a new senior pastor came in, Reverend Stuart Spencer, and he came. He wanted to go out we went out to lunch one day, and we're sitting there, and he said, what I'd really like to do, I'd like to figure out how to have a fresh start, the tabula rasa, with the culture in the church. I almost fell off my chair. I mean, he didn't know anything about what we were doing, and we've been doing this for a long time. And so I introduced him to this gentleman in the town, David Friedman, and his book. And they ended up, we had 32 fundamentals. They called theirs the ways. And they have, I think, 24 or 25 of them. And they're all really biblically tied. Now, ours are quasi-biblically tied, so it's you can kind of tell, but you can't really see, and that's on purpose. But the first one was amazing. Listen to this one. The first one was be third. God is first, others are second, and you're third. And then it says, don't just think about your own interests, but the interest of others. Don't think less of yourself, just think of yourself less. And others more. And then there's biblical citations. So I was, I just was really delighted to see. And they do what we did. That every week they use a different of the way. And it's in the bulletin, it's in the sermon. And when you get through the 25, then you start over. And so it's that routine, that ritualistic part. Not liturgical, but behavioral.
Exactly.
Purposeful, yeah. And I think that's what really brings people together, that type of a culture.
I think it's not something that everybody thinks about. The values that they sort of live by are not always acknowledged. If you ask a family, what are the values that you're raising your kids with? I mean, they had kind of stop and think about it. If you ask kids, hey, what are your parents' values? They kind of have to stop and think about it. So although we sort of live by this sort of unconsciously, I don't know that we always consciously, say, hey, be third. And what a beautiful thing to start doing. I mean, I would say practically speaking for any business, any church, to really be able to say, what is that verb that we can kind of work backwards to and integrate the concept around? And then, come up with some pretty smart goals around how we live that and what that looks like. And that gives us a framework to come back to in a moment where we actually have to practice that. Because that's the only way we really make it manifest, right? Is if we're sort of aware of the value and then we see a situation where we've actually had to practice that. Because I imagine it's not always easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you ever think about how you drive, like I always used to want to be first at the lights, the first one out of the gate. And actually trying not to do that is intentional, trying to not be the first of everything.
Well, I take it back now. When I was drag racing, I always wanted to be first. I was in drag racing. I got a nice trophy too. But anyway, that's different. That's different.
And a few speeding tickets along the way back.
Well, that's another story.
Yeah.
So it really crosses over into other areas of your life, is what I'm hearing you say. I mean, it becomes a lifestyle that you live even at the grocery store or in exiting your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right, trying to get that one parking spot to be close. I mean, that's
well, and I think that's and obviously what we're talking about. I mean, at its core is obviously the Christian based. I mean, they're biblically based. I mean, the idea of being patient, the idea of the Bible says carry each other's burdens, and in this way you fulfill the will of Christ. So what you're sharing are so beautiful, and I oftentimes tell people, we have to be very careful because Earth has a way of lying to us, that it kind of convinces us that, work hard, make a lot of money, retire. That's kind of like the formula that it has. And, we don't want anyone to misunderstand that we want you to be goal-driven. And I think God yearns for us to be goal-driven. He's given us all these gifts. He wants us to use them. But if the actual, if we forget what the real world is about, which he talks about, Christ speaks about in the life to come, not necessarily in the life that we're in now, we can invest everything on planet Earth. And what I admire so much about the two of you is that you're very much grounded, despite the successes that you've had. You actually use those successes as a platform to share Christ, and that's something that is really great. And I would encourage our listeners, and our viewers, obviously, is that as you're hearing this, Calvin and Ursula are just like all of us. They've just utilized the gifts that God's given them, and been very successful, but never forgotten who gave them those gifts, and are not only remembering it as a couple, but also allowing it to be part of their culture. And I think it's a challenge for us that no matter where we go, would people know about our faith by what they're seeing in us? Would they know what we value as Christians? Because I think sometimes, I oftentimes say this, that we kind of operate like Secret Service Christians. We're like, behind the frame. We don't want to show, or people will say, Father Nick, my faith is very private. I get all that. And there's a beauty for that, like we were talking about. We don't want to be overbearing or proselytizing so much. But at the same time, people shouldn't be wondering, I wonder what faith they are, or wondering what your viewpoint is, or mindset is on an issue that's happening in our workplace. And so I love the fact that you guys have done that. We've just got a few more moments, before the end of our show. I do want to encourage, if you do want to speak to the Knowltons, or if you want to email us, and we'll definitely get an email to them that they can answer after the show, you can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Or you can email us during the live broadcast of the show at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com.
So, and one of the writers sent some beautiful questions, and I think we sort of answered them, but really great questions, saying, what is the biblical vision and purpose of being in business, and how would the ways and character of God be expressed in that business? And obviously we sort of answered that all through the show, but in a nutshell, what wisdom would you have for this writer?
Well, in the Psalms, one of the most repetitive words is hesed, which is steadfast love, or that's interpreted other ways too, but loving kindness, things like that. And it's well over 120 times. I mean, so that's when you think about altruism. Altruism is a code word for loving kindness and hesed. And so I think that, and that's why I believe it's so important not just to have a mission, vision, and strategy, but also to have a purpose in your family, in your practice, wherever you are, in your business. Mission's great. Here's what I do, vision, where I'm going, the strategy, how I'm going to get there. But what's my overall, why am I coming here? What's my purpose? What are we trying to do?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we've had purposeful altruism as our watchword, because we're trying to do that. Now we could say hesed or we could say agape, but instead, we use altruism.
I mean, I'd like to answer that question a little bit differently and thinking about, the missionary Paul and how he was really the entrepreneur's entrepreneur.
Oh,
He
yeah.
started this church and it's lasted for thousands of years. I mean, it's amazing. And I often refer to scripture and I'll say, well, Cal, look at this sentence. Paul is saying, well, let me ask you a question. He's like a sales guy back and forth. Let me talk with you about your faith. And I thought it was so fun reading the Bible and seeing it from because I'm a salesperson, from a sales and marketing perspective, and helping others, being altruistic. There's other examples of fear not. Entrepreneurs can get tied up in anxiety and stress, but not having fear, knowing you're doing the right thing and feeling supported all the time, that God's with you all the time. I think that those are important concepts in business.
Well, and I love what you said earlier in a nutshell when you said the purpose of business is not to make money. That's not a purpose.
Right, it's not.
And what a beautiful way to begin with what it's not, because it'll open up for what's meaningful.
If you want to make money, you can have a bake sale. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but that's not really going to solve anything.
And people won't really follow you knowing that's all you want to do. It's not really something to lead.
Whether you're an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur in a big company, you have to have leadership skills that are honed, that you've developed, and people have to know what they are.
Calvin, in the last few minutes of the show, I say we have a list, that we have a viewer tonight that's watching this, or maybe they're downloading this podcast, and they are starting up a business. They feel it on their heart that God has just put on their heart to start a business. What should they do first? What is the thing that you would recommend when they're hiring their staff, they're trying to get started? What is something that you would say to them that, hey, this is something that you need to do first? Through our experience.
I would give them 2 books. I'd give them Clay Christensen, who's a Harvard business professor, retired, passed away 2 years ago, staunch Mormon, like an oxymoron in Harvard business. But I'm telling you, how will you measure your life? Is his book. It's a little 100-page book, and it's breathtaking. How will you measure your life? And the other one, if you need help on the culture, David Friedman really has done a heck of a job. He's helped over 500 companies to come out what's their real purpose, and how can they design a culture around that, and how can they ritualize it, and how can they review it? Because you have to make sure things are going well through surveys and things like that of your people. So I would say that the Culture by Design book, and I would definitely say his, Clay Christensen's How Will You Measure Your Life would be 2 things I'd ask them to read first.
And I would say pray about it and talk to a lot of people that business would impact to see what their thoughts are. But thank you for all of your support, your daily inspirations, the podcast, the sermons. They've just been so very helpful to us and supportive.
Well, I think that for, as I hear you speak, I can't help but think of myself as a parish priest, that, sometimes leadership, and you all obviously know this better than I do, but sometimes leadership is not always from the top. It's or at the top or the lead. Sometimes you're leading from the back. And, I found that people are watching me as a priest, and I know that they watch you as executives in your position. They're watching more from what we do than what we can ever say. And in many ways, we're all like children. We're all observing people constantly. And I loved how you were sharing that too, Ursula, about the book. And, what would people be reading in our own book? What would the pages of our book, the pages of our life, what would people be saying about that? And so I think what you're sharing is so powerful. And I think at the end of the day, for all of us, is making sure that our faith is not something that we just do at a time, but it becomes a way of life. It becomes an ethos, like you were talking about earlier. It becomes a culture that we're parting. Because I think sometimes, God sometimes I think looks at us and goes, I don't recognize you, Nick. I recognize you here in this environment, but I don't recognize you
Right.
in this environment. And I think that to avoid the adage of being a multiple personality Christian, I think that we need to make sure that we're doing that. And what a great place to do that in our workplace, where people are watching us, and especially in this society. So I really thank you both, Calvin and Ursula, Doctors Calvin and Ursula Knowlton. We love you. We love you so much, not only for your friendship, but more importantly for what you are representing to us.
Absolutely.
And to the people that are coming across your path. And so
thank you for inspiring our listeners today as well. I'm sure you've impacted so many.
Yes, absolutely. And we are going to stay on for a few more minutes as we welcome in Father Tom. But I do wanted to thank Matushka Trudy for producing tonight's show. She always does an amazing job doing that. And I do apologize to our viewers early on. We had a little technological difficulty. That's what happens with live live shows. We're going to have that at times, but we're grateful that you stuck with us tonight and just enjoyed this amazing show. Next Tuesday, we have a brand new show of Live with the Louhs, and so I'm looking forward to having all of you with us. My friends, God bless you, and stay strong in your walk of faith.